Okay, so we are back and we are answering some questions. You're allowed to ask questions during class as well as during your break. So both of those things are fine though. It's not bad to ask questions whenever you feel like it. Okay, so we have some more questions about what are attributes. And I get that it's a little bit confusing. And in fact, scholars don't even agree about what Spinoza thinks about attributes, right? So here's some various things that I've told people during the break. So what are attributes? So for an extended substance, uh, what is the attribute of extension? And it's kind of, so again, Spinoza is calling it the essence of the substance. So what does that mean? Well, later, sorry, I think on a later slide, I have it that essence is the same thing as Spinoza talks about kind and something else, type or whatever. So it's a categorization of a substance that categorizes substances by the types of modes that they can have or participate in. So what is it to be a thinking substance? It's to be the type of substance that has modes like having ideas, having doubts, and having knowledge, right? It's not having any particular mode makes you a thinking substance. So Descartes might doubt that he has hands. You don't doubt that you have hands. Um, you're both still thinking substances. Thinking substance is the type of thing that can have one or another, any of various types of thinking modes. So if you're thinking at all, then you're a thinking substance. To be a thinking substance or to have the attribute of thought is to have the ability to have various thinking modes and to maybe of necessity have some particular ones among others, right? So if you think about extended substance, there's no particular shape that you need to be an extended substance, but you need to have some shape or another. There's no extended thing that has no shape whatsoever, right? It has to have a particular shape. So being an extended substance has, first of all, comes with requirements. You must have at least some shape mode, right? I'm not telling you which particular one, but you have to have one. So there's requirements. So having that attribute brings with it some requirements of how you must be. So you must have certain modes. And then it also has certain possibilities. So you must have a certain shape mode. And also, if you're an extended substance, then you may have various other shape modes that you don't have, right? So like the wax can change its shape. So it doesn't currently have other shapes, but the possibility of having another shape is part of the essence of a thinking substance. So being a thinking substance says, here are all your possibilities, and also you must choose some particular ones of them, right? You must choose whether to doubt that you have hands or not doubt that you have hands. You must choose to be circular or not circular. You must make some choice, right? You have to have something from this selection of physical modes. So confusingly enough, being an attribute is kind of a modal character. It's about how things could be and must be, right? Rather than about how they are, right? So what modes you have is a fact about how you are. So if you just look at the diagram, nothing about this diagram tells you about the attribute necessarily, because it doesn't tell you that Descartes, his substance can't also have, say, a shape. Nothing about this diagram says that it can't. But saying that Descartes is a thinking substance rather than an extended substance is supposed to tell you about the profile of how the substance works. that it can't have things like shapes and that it can have things like ideas, right? So attributes are about ways that you can be and ways that you must be, right? So they're either, yeah, so for extended substances, there are ways that you must be, you must have some sort of shape, and there's ways that you can be. You can be circular, you can be triangle, you can be square, right? And being in a thinking substance says there are ways that you can be. You can be thinking about this, or you can be thinking about this, or you can be thinking about this. And it says there are ways that you must be, that you must. And so one of the crazy views of some Cartesians was that people must always be thinking. So even if you are in a deep sleep, you're still thinking about something because you're a thinking substance, and thinking substances of necessity have thoughts, right? Yeah, good.
So this is all Descartes. We haven't moved to Spinoza yet.
I don't think that at current there's not a huge difference.
Right, yeah.
So, yeah, so currently we're trying to understand both. Yeah, so what did Descartes mean by thinking substance? It is this kind of modal profile of what types of properties you can have, modes you can have, and what types of modes you must have, right? So that's what, so I'm saying that that's what Descartes said, but Descartes doesn't use the word attribute and thinking of it as something separate. Spinoza introduces the idea of attribute to characterize these modal flavors of things so that he can then say the thing that Descartes never believed, that substances can have multiple attributes, right? And that seems problematic. Like if you look at Spinoza's definition, if the attribute is the essence of the substance, then how could it be that a substance had at once one essence, which is thinking, thought, and another essence, which is extension? It seems as though one could not have two essences. It seems as though anything that exists has at most one essence. Spinoza doesn't think that quite clearly. Well, no, not clearly yet. We'll see it later quite clearly. Like he thinks God is a substance with infinite attributes. So he thinks you can have more than one essence. So how will we ultimately understand that? Part of it we'll have to get there. But part of it is that if you notice, I was skipping over some parts here, right? By attribute, he says, I mean that which the intellect perceives as constituting the essence of the substance. So there is one interpretation of Spinoza on which Spinoza doesn't actually believe in attributes, even though attribute is what's defined in definition 4, and Spinoza says God has infinitely many attributes. One prominent, though I won't say it's a majority view, but still exists within Spinoza scholarship, is that Spinoza doesn't believe in attributes, except as like attributes are limited human ways of seeing things. So I can look at a thing and my intellect perceives the chair as having a certain physical essence. And so this perception of my intellect is the attribute of the thing. But the chair actually isn't limited in the way that my intellect perceives it. The chair actually can be other ways. So that essence is, so on this interpretation, attributes are only in the eye of the beholder, right? Because they're only what the intellect perceives as constituting the essence of things. Things actually don't have attributes in themselves. That's an interpretation, and I probably shouldn't have even said it because that makes things more confusing, but it's fair to understand that if you don't understand Spinoza, it's not necessarily true that you've missed something. It's like lots of scholars don't understand Spinoza, and lots of scholars disagree about what Spinoza meant. Yeah, so what is an attribute? I think it's important to understand kind of that attributes are not third things. There's not a place in the diagram to put in the attributes. And I'm not going to stick another line out here and put in attribute of extension, right? So attributes aren't there aren't like a magic type of mode. Rather, attributes should be thought of more as like a profile of what is possible for a substance and what is necessary for a substance. What is the essence of the substance? So that's what an attribute is. So there's not like substance over here and modes over here and also this other thing that attribute, but rather there's just the substance and then it has a certain modal profile about what types of modes it can and cannot have. I think I answered some of the many questions I was asked about attributes, but not all. Does anybody want to ask more questions about attributes? Yeah.
So can we go back to this attribute type?
Yes.
So the comparison here is only that Descartes didn't use the language, and the rest same. I think.
Yeah. So I would say that the notion of attribute does exist within Descartes, in that he thinks that there are thinking substances, and so to call a substance a thinking substance, I think what Descartes thinks is to say that it has a certain modal profile, that there are certain ways it can be and certain ways it can't be. So Descartes already thinks that. Spinoza is giving it a name, attribute, and then he's going to say crazy things about it. So he wants to give it a name so that he can say crazy stuff about attributes. Other questions? All right. So it's fine if we're not crushing the Spinoza. We can go as slow as needs be. Cool. So first, I wanted to go through substance, attribute, and mode. So we went through definitions 3, 4, and 5, and we kind of got the picture. It always helps. I do think it helps. One thing, this sounds terrible, but like if you don't understand Spinoza, one thing that helps is to keep reading, right? So keep reading. Maybe the stuff that comes later puts things into a context that then you can understand the things that came earlier. So sometimes you just have to flag, I don't really know what he means by this. But then when you see him use attribute or substance or mode later on, it will help you understand what he means by that. So I'm not going to go through all the definitions, but I did want to talk about finitude and infinitude and what God is for Spinoza. Because we're... So let me just I'm going to foreshadow the picture of where Spinoza is going to go. As crazy as it may sound right now, because we haven't argued for it, Spinoza is going to argue that there is only one substance in existence. Exactly one substance, no more, no less. That substance he is going to call God, right? So there's only one substance. There's not Descartes and the wax and God and other people and physical objects. There's only one substance in existence, and that substance is God. What is that substance? Is it a thinking substance? Is it an extended substance? Spinoza is going to say it is a substance with infinitely many attributes, right? So God has infinitely many attributes. So it is both a thinking substance and an extended substance and a blank substance, because it has all the attributes, infinitely many of them. What are the ones besides thinking and extension? Spinoza declines to tell us. So he says God has infinite attributes, but I will only tell you about 2, thinking and extension. So there you go. This is going to be the picture, is all of reality is the same thing as God. God is reality, right? The only substance in existence is God. What are you and I, right? We are modes of God, right? So that's going to be Spinoza's picture. Why did people want to burn Spinoza's works and ban them and refuse to teach them? Is because, yeah, I mean, that's pretty crazy. It's not a normal thing to think about God. Spinoza's God is, so there's this famous line from Spinoza. It is, in Latin, it is Deus sive natura. It means God, or another way to put it, nature. So Spinoza's God is nature itself. It is not like a personal being in the way that Descartes thinks of God. So like for Descartes, God is like another thinking substance who just has more knowledge than Descartes. So Descartes is a thinking substance who has this much knowledge. God is a thinking substance who has more knowledge. They're just two thinking substances. They're very, like, in a way, on Descartes' view, Descartes and God are very similar things, right? God is much more, God is maxed out. Descartes has a certain amount of power, God has infinite power. Descartes has a certain amount of knowledge, God has infinite knowledge, right? But in the type of thing that they are, God and Descartes, on Descartes' view, are very similar things. Whereas on Spinoza's level, in Spinoza's view, Spinoza and God are very different things. God is the only substance that exists, and Spinoza is just a finite mode of God. So that's just some preview of why Spinoza's views were viewed as heretical or crazy. Many people, like, while Spinoza said he believed in God, and I think he legitimately did, he just believed in his version of God, which he thought was respectable, and not the other version of God, which he thought was silly, right? So he thinks a personal God is kind of silly. That's what humans would invent. It's like God is just like a human, but with superpowers. A human with superpowers who lives on a mountain or something. And Spinoza thinks that that idea is silly, and that God is actually not at all like a human. God is like the fundamental ground of being, right? Not a personal thing, but rather nature itself, all of reality. And this idea was very new at the time and not popular among the authorities, right? Cool. Question so far? All right, sorry. All right.
Okay.
Yeah, good.
So does Descartes saying God is a thinking thing? So is that
Yes.
okay?
All right. So let's talk about God. So let's talk about two other definitions. So in definition 2, Spinoza talks about what it is to be finite. And instead of defining finite generally, he defines finite after its kind. So Spinoza says a thing is called finite after its kind when it can be limited by another thing of the same nature, right? So we might go, well, what do you mean? And then Spinoza says, helpfully, for example, a body is called finite because we can conceive of another greater body. So I've taken this decade-old photo of Shaquille O'Neal and his girlfriend at the time, whose name I forget. And you can see that some bodies are bigger than other bodies. And that's what Spinoza means by being limited by another thing of the same nature. So we can tell that this person is finite after the kind of being an extended substance because she's limited by other bodies. That is, you can conceive a greater body, therefore this body is finite after its own kind. And additionally, Shaq himself will also be finite after his kind, because you can imagine, you know, I don't actually have a person who's so tall, but you can imagine a person who's bigger than Shaq. So if you can conceive of a bigger body, then this thing is finite. So if you have an extended thing that's bigger, even if only in imagination, then this thing must be finite, right? So Michael is finite because you can imagine a bigger person than me, right? And then Spinoza thinks thought also has a finite infinite distinction. So a thought is limited. Oh, and then he also thinks that there's a distinction between thoughts being bigger and thoughts being smaller. Harder to imagine what that means. And then he thinks that the reason why we've relativized finitude towards kinds is that he thinks that things aren't limit, like bodies aren't limited by thoughts. It's not like you can have a bigger thought than this woman or a bigger thought than this man, right? Thoughts don't limit bodies, but the larger body is a limit on the smaller body, is how Spinoza is thinking about it. Why does this matter? Well, we have to see how the definitions get used to really see why it matters. I'm bringing it up because we're going to talk about the definition of God, and God is going to be infinite. So we have to know what Spinoza means by finite. But I guess the ultimate point that I will make is that people did not have a modern notion of infinitude when Spinoza was writing. So nowadays in mathematics, infinite means there's always a next one, right? So the numbers, the natural numbers are infinite because no matter how large a number you have, n, there's always a next one, n plus 1. And that makes the numbers infinite, right? Infinity is a size and not a number, right? It's the size of a class of things when there's always a next one. The sentences of the English language, there are infinitely many grammatical sentences of the English language. Why? Because no matter how long and complicated of a sentence you have, there's always a longer and more complicated one. Just stick Michael believes that at the front, right? So however long a sentence you have, just make it longer by putting Michael believes that and then blah, 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 blah. Since there's always a bigger one, the number of English sentences that are grammatical is infinite. Since there's always a next number, the numbers are infinite. The older conception that we see in Descartes and Spinoza of infinitude is kind of like you cannot imagine more. That's their notion of infinity. So a body is finite if you can imagine more. And if you can imagine more, then it's finite. But if you get to a size that you can't imagine a bigger size, then you've found infinity, right? And that's not exactly the same thing. So here's another interpretation of Spinoza that exists, but I'm not going to say whether it's true or not because people disagree. Some people think that even though Spinoza says God has infinitely many attributes, that Spinoza believes that God has 2 attributes. Why? Because they think that there are only 2 attributes, and thus you can't imagine more. And thus, since God has all the attributes that you can imagine, God has infinitely many attributes. So 2 is infinitely many if there are only 2. That's one interpretation of Spinoza. It's not the one I'm going to focus on in this class. But yeah, that's a way to think about Spinoza. He thinks that infinite just means you're infinite if there's not more, and you're finite if there could be more, right? Like if you're not the biggest thing, then you're a finite body. If you are as big as it's possible to be, then you're an infinite body. Cool. Why did my thing stop working? Oh, good. All right. Oh, and yeah, I put here, Spinoza defines finitude in kind as being limited by a thing of the same nature. And so I want to say that I don't like this aspect of Spinoza, but he's a spicy character and he likes to spice things up by using different words to talk about the same thing. But as far as I understand it, Spinoza means by kind the same thing that he means by nature, at least if he's talking about the nature of a substance. It's the same thing that he means by essence, the essence of a substance, and it's the same thing he means by attribute. We know attribute and essence are the same because the definition of attribute is the essence of a substance. We know that kind is the same thing as attribute because when Spinoza talks about a thing being finite after its kind, then he tells you what kinds of things are, and he says the kinds of things are body and thought, which are the attributes. So we know that kind, essence, and attribute are all the same thing. but also sometimes he uses the word nature to mean the same thing. When he talks about nature of substance, it's important though that when Spinoza does say things like Deus sive natura, where he says God or nature, when he says nature in that sense, he just means all of nature, all of reality, right? So sometimes by nature, he means reality. Sometimes by nature, he means essence. You gotta figure it out by context. That is all I can really say. Cool. All right, so now we are ready for the definition of what God is. Okay. By God, I mean a being absolutely infinite that is a substance consisting in infinite attributes, of which each expresses eternal and infinite essentiality. I'm not going to attempt to explain all aspects of the definition at the moment. When we get to the proof that God exists in Spinoza, we will see what Spinoza thinks he needs to establish that God exists. And that will help us understand what he means when he says that all of God, excuse me, not Spinoza, but all of God's attributes express eternal and infinite essentiality. So there's probably, what is it for a substance to express something? Complicated question. What is it to be eternal? Well, that's actually another definition that Spinoza has. You can go read that. It's not very enlightening. What is it to have infinite essentiality? We'll have to get there, right? So there's stuff in this definition that I don't want to try to explain. But I do want, so this emphasis was added by me. The emphasis is the underlying part, substance consisting in infinite attributes. I think that's the thing that we should start by focusing on. What is God? God is a substance with infinite attributes. Already, we have a picture that is very non-Cartesian, because for Descartes, you're either a thinking substance or a bodily substance. But Descartes, even though he had this mind-body problem, where he's like, here's Descartes' body, here's Descartes' mind, and Descartes' mind seems to control Descartes' body. How are these two substances related to one another? At no point did Descartes think that the solution was to say, maybe, dun, 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 it's one substance with two attributes, right? Descartes doesn't go there. Spinoza is going to go there. He's going to say one substance can have two attributes, and in fact, one substance can have infinitely many attributes. And in fact, there is such a substance. That substance is God. Right? So God is the substance with infinitely many attributes. And Spinoza gives us an explanation for this definition of God. And so he says, I just define God as a being that's absolutely infinite. And he says, I say absolutely infinite. And by that I mean not infinite after its own kind. So he thinks that not only is God an extended substance where no body can be conceived that is larger than God. So that's what makes it infinite. It's not limited by a larger possible body, but also it's infinite in thought. So it's not limited by any greater thought. And also it's infinite in whatever other attributes might exist. Spinoza doesn't explain what they are, right? That which is absolutely infinite contains in its essence whatever expresses reality. I don't want to try to explain that just now. All right. I did put this funky diagram. I put in the description where it got it from is the Jewish Encyclopedia published hundreds of years after Spinoza died. This is just somebody's representation of what Spinoza's God sive natura looks like, right? And so you have thought and extension are two attributes of God, but as you see, all these unknown attributes are radiating out because who knows what those are. And then the attributes attached to all the attributes are the various modes. And then Spinoza has mediate and immediate modes, we'll have to try to figure out what that is. Probably we'll never figure out what that is. Infinite and finite modes, and then all the individual things wind up being modes of God, who's the one and only substance. Right. That is somebody else's picture. Here's my picture, right? Here's what, using the sort of diagram I used for the wax and for Descartes, here's the picture of Spinoza's God. Is, first of all, we have at the bottom a substance. The substance is divided into attributes, like the attribute of thought, the attribute of extension, the attribute of, we don't know what the other attributes are, so question mark, question mark, question mark, but infinitely many. And it could be only two, because two is one way of being infinite if there are only two things. Remember on this definition of infinite. And then attached to each attribute are the different modes that that sort of attribute can have. So all the particular thinking is going on, and all the particular extended stuff going on, and blah, blah, blah. So God is this big, is a substance with infinitely many attributes. Each of those attributes has modes that are appropriate to its essence, right, as that type of attribute. Yeah.
So, since attributes are kind of a modal thing, then why can't we just skip attributes?
Why can't we skip attributes? So this is a good question, but the answer is different people answer it in different ways, right? So as I said, there's some philosophers who think you can just skip attributes because attributes don't exist, right? So they look at Spinoza's definition of attribute and they say, well, look, if you look at what he says this is what the intellect perceives as constituting the essence of a substance. So I might look at the world and perceive it as having an extended essence, but then I might look at maybe from a different angle and perceive something as having a thinking essence. And so dividing up nature into different attributes is really a human perspective on things. It's how I conceive of things, but it's not really a real distinction in the things. So that's one view you could have. That view, yeah, just says, actually, Spinoza's attributes are, they're conceptual categories, they're not metaphysical categories. Right? I actually don't agree that that's true. The reason why is that actually there's an aspect of this picture which is incorrect. So, and this is one of the definitions I don't have a slide for an explanation, but, or maybe, is it a definition or is it a axiom? One of the, I think is an axiom. Yeah, it's an axiom where Spinoza says that a true thought is one that corresponds with reality or something like that, right? Whatever the axiom about truth and correspondence is. So Spinoza does say that actually, if you have a true thought, so if you think that the door is brown, that door is brown, and then you have the door being brown, right? The extended thing and it's brown. Then he thinks that the door being brown, which is going to be a mode of God's extension, and the thought that the door is brown are actually one and the same thing. So if you have true thoughts, the true thought is the same as the thing that it's a thought about. So if I think that the door is brown and the door is brown, then my thought that the door is brown and the door is being brown are the same thing. And he's going to think that they're the same thing under different attributes, right? So the thinking part is me thinking that the door is brown, and that's really the same thing as the door being brown, just kind of with different perspectives on them. So Spinoza is a bit confusing. But anyway, so yeah, so we have this question, all right, what does it mean for God to have multiple attributes? I thought an attribute of a thing was its essence. How can you have more than one essence? This I want to just flag as excellent question, but not a question that has a determinate answer. Spinoza interpreters interpret the question differently. And one view is we don't really believe in attributes at all. They're not part of the metaphysics. They're part of how people think about metaphysics. And on another view, God's essence or God's substance does have a clear division between different attributes, but then the idea is just, yes, you can have multiple essences at once. You can just be a multifaceted, many-facing type of thing. Both of those things sound a bit weird, because on the one hand, to say that attributes aren't really real, it's odd that Spinoza talks about them so much if he doesn't think that they're really part of the metaphysics. But then it's also hard to understand what it could possibly mean to have multiple essences, right? Certainly not going to find Aristotle saying you can have multiple essences, right? All right, so questions so far? Still questions? All right, so before we move on, I just wanted to give some, one other person's endorsement of Spinoza. Here's this guy that you may recognize, Albert Einstein. He said, "I believe in Spinoza's God, who reveals himself in the harmony of all that exists. I don't believe in a God who concerns himself with the fate and the doings of mankind." So that was one thing that Einstein once said, is that he does believe in God, just the God of Spinoza, the God who is also, in a different aspect, just nature. And Einstein also said, excuse me, in a different place, Spinoza is the greatest of modern philosophers because he is the first philosopher who deals with the soul and the body as one, not as two separate things, right? So this problem that we pointed out, how can you have both a thinking and an extended essence? Einstein is at least praising Spinoza for this aspect of his philosophy and saying, here's how you deal with mind and body. You put them both within one umbrella. One substance has both a thinking essence and an extended essence. So at least Einstein appreciated Spinoza. Okay, you may have noticed that there's two definitions that I left off, and I'm going to leave off until we need them. So the other definitions that we haven't considered, actually three definitions, sorry, D1, D7, and D8. Those are where Spinoza defines what it is to be free, what it is to be self-caused, and what it is to be eternal. As you can imagine, Spinoza is going to argue that God is self-caused, God is eternal, and we're going to have a discussion about free later. Okay. Freedom is, so just to give you a preview, so sometimes this isn't a movie theater, and so I'm not trying to keep the suspense up. So to give you an idea of what's coming, Spinoza is a necessitarian. He believes that everything that happens must happen, and that everything in the world that exists must exist. So everything that could possibly exist does exist. This table has to exist. It must be here. Another possible table that could be here, absolutely impossible. Actually, there's no such thing as other possible things. Everything that is must be as it is. Everything that happens must happen as it does. Does God have freedom in the sense that God picks between different alternatives of the way that the world can be? No, God has no such freedom. There is only one way the world can be, and that is the way that the world is. Everything that happens must happen. It could not have happened any other way. That is one of Spinoza's main beliefs. I don't know if we'll get to reading that part. That comes like after Proposition 24 is the part where Spinoza starts to argue for his necessitarian position. And we will get to some of the parts where you'll see why Spinoza is led there. So there's a sense in which neither human beings nor God are free on Spinoza's philosophy, because everything that happens as it must. But at the same time, if you cast your thought back to when I told you all the different parts of the ethics, a lot of later parts of the ethics are about human liberty and freedom. Spinoza is, while he's a hardcore determinist, he's also a type of compatibilist who believes that there is a type of freedom that exists even when everything is as it must be, right? So we'll get some degree towards there. I don't know how far we'll get there. Presumably, we won't be talking about any of this until next time. Oh boy. Oh. Okay. I'm just saying that because we have 4 minutes left, and I just got through only doing some of the definitions of Spinoza. Cool. So where do I want to go from here? Let's see. Do I have enough time to talk about the? Ooh, had a lot of things to say. All right. I don't think in 4 minutes I can say anything useful, unfortunately. I think I'd start saying something and I'd just make it more confusing. So while we still have a few minutes left, does anybody want to ask questions about what we've covered so far? Last chance this week. Good.
So I understand with Descartes, he believes that attributes and substance are only intellectually distinguished, but not not really.
Well, I mean, like Descartes doesn't talk about attribute, so who knows? Yeah, so it's sort of like, yeah, I do think your attribute is kind of more like your is your profile. It's like how you could be and how you couldn't be, whereas a substance is more like your categorical nature. So there's the thing, and the substance is just a thing that exists, and that's all there is to it, whereas the attribute tells you about how the thing could be and couldn't be, right? So that's part of the thing that exists, right? Existing involves having an essence, and your essence is how you can be and how you can't be. And so Descartes does think, yeah, so he thinks everything has the essence, but I'm not sure I want to say that the attribute and the substance are identical, right? Because the attribute is more about how the substance can be, which is part of the nature, which is the nature of the substance, but isn't necessarily the substance itself, right? So I think of substances as more categorical, essences as a more dispositional, right? Essence is how you could and couldn't be. Substance is just the thing that you are, right? Not the way that you are, because the way that you are is your modes, but the thing that you are is the substance. Good. Other questions or thoughts? Okay, so here's some things you can do. You can read the Spinoza. You can look at the rest of the slides that I didn't get to today if you want some. And next time I'm going to what I'll try to do is get through the axioms, and then I'm going to just put the Spinoza text up, and I'm going to try to try to teach you how to read it. Because since we can't read the whole thing together in class, I want to try to teach you how to read it on your own so that you can go approach the Spinoza and then get as much out of it as you'd like to. But that's all we have time for today.